everyone to the hotel room that I have here in Seattle as the currently the Naughton Hall of Fame office is moved from Winnipeg to Seattle. And I've got with me a special guest, and we are going to talk historical sports because that's his podcast, Historical Speaking Sports. I have that right?
Historically speaking sports.
Historically speaking sports, my bad. Easy for me to say. And I've got
That's all right. Look, that's all right. As long as you get it out there, that's all that matters.
There you go. There you go. And I've got with me Dana Auguster, or actually I just mispronounced that, didn't I? Auguster, my bad. And I
Augusta, there you go.
Yeah. Eventually I'll get it. I'm Canadian and sometimes a little slow. So you'll have to bear with me.
Canadians are cool. Some of my best friends are Canadian. So, I have a Canadian friend. I've been friends for 30 years, and she lives in Hamilton. So shout out to Melissa Cameron and her family, Sharon and Mary and her husband, Mark. Shout out to them whenever they listen.
I grew up in the town right next to it, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, so I know Hamilton very, very well. Don't say that I really miss Hamilton so much. Sorry if I'm sort of offending the people of Hamilton, but come on, you're the Pittsburgh of Canada. We know this, but that's okay.
Pittsburgh's a nice place.
Sure.
Well, it seems like it's a nice place. I've never been there, but it seems like it's a nice place.
Well, they're great sports fans. We can say that. So Dana, here's my first question that I wanted to ask you. When was the first time that you ever remember sort of thinking about watching something current in sports and then going right back to it and thinking something historically?
Well, that's basically the crux of my podcast is I would take something current and kind of compare it to something that has happened in the past, because a lot of times, 90% of the time, we've seen this before. Okay. And I want to educate people about, we've seen this before. When did we see it? Okay. And then go back to that time period and go from there. And a lot of times it was one of those things growing up that I just, for whatever reason, felt like I had a gift to do. One of the things that I would do is, and it would freak my friends out in high school, that we would see something on TV and man, we ain't never seen that before. Yes, you did. You remember, and I would bring up something in the past that they knew nothing about. Okay. And I would just kind of tell the story about it. And some of my friends were like, dude, how you know that? It was just one of those things that it just came to me naturally. Some people would be really good with their hands, very, very mechanically inclined. That wasn't me. It was more along the lines of telling stories and writing and that sort of thing. And it was sports history that I gravitated to as a young person.
Do you have a particular sport that you're fascinated with the history of more than others?
It depends on the year. People ask me all the time, what's your favorite sport? Whatever's going on right now. That's my favorite sport. Really, it started with football because I played football as a kid. And that was the first sport that I really, truly gravitated to. And then later it became basketball, junior high, high school, because my high school was one of the best high school basketball programs in the country in Louisiana. And then baseball came right at the tail end of high school. In fact, the podcast episode that I'm working on now, I talk about the first time I went to a professional baseball game, which was in the summer of 1989. I was 16 years old, and first trip was to Wrigley Field of all places.
Oh, wow.
And it was one of the great moments of my life. And I truly became a baseball fan that day because I started to understand what the big fuss was about baseball. Some people like my dad, for example, doesn't like baseball at all. And it is almost like he's bitter about it, as if he's not involved in something, or if something is being kept from him about baseball. Me, my grandfather, my godfather, we're all in the same, we get it. But my dad's I don't get it. And he feels from his point of view, or from my point of view, looking at him, it's almost as if he's not in on something. And I think that's kind of terrible, but at the same time, that's when it started for me. And when it comes down to any sport, particularly, I try to learn everything there is to know. Now, hockey, I haven't got there yet. I'm
Mhm.
learning. I'm learning, but I haven't got there yet.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of my wheelhouse for, well, big shock there. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, we come out in skates actually from the womb, except for me, I think I tripped.
That's something. I mean, I've tried ice skating once, and my ankles are not built for that, mainly because of all the ankle injuries I've had in playing football and basketball.
Mhm.
So my ankles are just not made to be on skates, at least inline. Roller get, just regular roller skates from back in the day. Yeah, I could do that, but I haven't. With my bad knee and everything, that's not a good idea for me right now.
So you mentioned though the podcast that you're working on now about your first baseball game. What are some of the other things that you sort of looked at on your show that the listeners and the viewers would be interested to learn about?
Well, I do. What I normally do is I have a couple of things that are in the works. One of the things that I have done over the last couple of years is something called Forgotten Franchises. And what it is basically I would take a franchise that no longer exists, and people have kind of forgotten about, and basically write their history, and basically talk about their history, their great players and stuff. The last Forgotten Franchises episode I did was about a month ago about the Kentucky Colonels, which was a former team in the American Basketball Association and you had some really great players on that team. They were supposed to be part of the NBA, but as the story goes, the Chicago Bulls nixed that idea, for various reasons, including the fact that the star of the team was actually part of they drafted several years earlier. So they didn't want them to be in the NBA because they would not have their star player, which was Artis Gilmore. But last year I did the St. Louis Hawks, which you now know as the Atlanta Hawks, but they spent a long time in St. Louis and actually won an NBA title as the St. Louis Hawks, and they were the first real true rival to the Boston Celtics in the late 50s and early 60s. In fact, they were the first team to beat the Celtics in an NBA final. So, they were part of that early NBA with the St. Louis Hawks, and then the team just kind of like had bad financial dealings in the mid 60s and ended up moving to Atlanta to greener pastures, supposedly. Moved here to Atlanta. I'm in Atlanta
Yeah.
and moved here. And from that point on, they've been mediocre at best at times. At times, they've had great teams in the 80s with Dominique Wilkins and Tree Rollins and that group. But lately, it's kind of like with that team been hit or miss.
Right. Yeah, I guess maybe every time you look at Trey Young, you're thinking of Luka Doncic.
Yeah, exactly. What could have been?
And
You
Trey's a
know,
good player, but
both, and Trey Young is pretty much maybe basically has one foot out the door and the other foot on a banana peel right about now, with him, kind of like toying with perhaps going to the Lakers, maybe.
Mhm.
We don't know. We'll see how all that shakes out in the offseason. But, with the Hawks and being here in Atlanta, which is basically two things that here in Atlanta, it's baseball with the Braves
Mhm.
and football. And we're recording this the day after the Falcons had the draft pick of picking Michael Penix at number 8 overall, and people have lost their minds. Like, why would you do that? You know, it's Atlanta, and they still haven't gotten over 28-3 in the Super Bowl. Still, right now, and I don't blame them.
I'm a diehard Saints guy. I don't know if you are, based on where you're from.
Well, I'm from Louisiana originally.
Mhm.
My wife is a Saints fan. My son is a Saints fan.
Mhm.
My grandfather went to the very first Saints game
Oh,
in
wow.
1967. I'm the oddball. I'm a Chargers fan. Go figure.
Okay.
And I've been a Chargers fan since the early '80s of the Don Coryell and Air Coryell. Since that group with Dan Fouts, my all-time favorite player. And I've been a Chargers fan ever since. I'm the oddball. Me and my dad are the oddballs. My dad's a Raider fan. And that's one of the reasons why I picked the Chargers as a favorite team because that'd give us a chance for he and I to go head to head all the time. And it's still like that to this day.
Yeah, I can kind of understand that. I'm a Saints fan because of a logo, as weird as that sounds.
Oh, the Fleur de Lis, right.
Yeah, because like the first thing I started watching was hockey. I have my mom's from Quebec. Her maiden name was Goulet. There was a superstar named
Okay.
Michel Goulet on the Nordiques.
Right, right,
Um,
right. Cool logo. One of the coolest hockey logos ever. And they had the Fleur de Lis on the jersey,
right.
which was also pretty cool, you know. So I can see I can see how that could happen.
Yeah, it's sort of a weird thing because people ask me all the time. So like, how did you become a Saints fan growing up in Canada? It doesn't fit. And also they weren't that good then.
Yeah, and people ask me the same thing. How did you become a Chargers fan growing up in South Louisiana, in the heart of Saints country?
Mhm.
Couple reasons. One, the Chargers were really good, and my dad was a Raiders fan, and that was a natural rivalry between father and son.
Yeah.
And two, in the early '80s, the Saints were hot garbage. So that was another reason. That was the era of the Aints when people used to go to the Superdome with bags on their heads. So that was, the reason why I gravitated to the Chargers and plus had the coolest uniforms. You can't beat lightning bolts on uniforms. You can't beat that. Personal preference, but yeah, I just can't beat that.
No, I hear you. Well, wait till you get more into hockey. Then you've got those. You have two defunct franchises right there in Atlanta.
I didn't realize it show you how little I was into hockey. I didn't realize until after I moved here that the Flames came from Atlanta. I did not know that until I moved here in 2011. It might have been like 2012 when I realized that. But I always thought the Flames were always in Calgary, always. And I saw a hockey jersey in a mall with a
Yeah.
flame going through the A. I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. What team is that? It's like that's the Flames.
Mhm.
Wait, Atlanta Flames? Like, what, they're like a new team or something? No, that's the old team from the '70s and stuff
Yeah.
like that. I never knew that. And then that was right around the same time the Thrashers were here. And I never made it to a Thrashers game. Never made it to one. Always wanted to go check it out, but never had the opportunity. But still, hockey is one of those sports that I kind of gravitated towards later in life because it was just so interesting. It's one of those things where, my wife would walk into the room and see me watching a hockey game, and she was like, "You would watch anything that's sports related, huh?" I'm like, yeah.
Yep. Right. Yeah. I'm the
Yeah.
exact same way. No, for sure. It's like as we're doing this now, I'm recording two hockey games, two basketball games, and I think I've already recorded rounds 2 and 3 of the draft. And then just sort of like we'll do that whole deep dive later, just sort of like just soak it more of it in. I just love this stuff. Uh, what are some of the upcoming things that you're planning for your show?
Well, on the podcast, I have a couple things that's in the works. One is the 45th anniversary of the Pittsburgh Pirates' last World Series win, the We Are Family Pittsburgh Pirates. That's 45 years ago this summer that they won the World Series. I have a friend of mine who went to three of the Pirates games as a kid, three of the World Series games at '03 River Stadium, rooting on the Pirates, which I can't wait to do that. Also, I have something that I didn't know was going to be actually kind of current, but here it is. This is also the 30th anniversary of the summer of '94, which I called the summer that sports lost its innocence.
Mhm.
You had the New York Rangers winning the Stanley Cup in for the first time since 1940, beating the Vancouver Canucks in an epic seven-game series. You also had the Rockets winning their first NBA title against the Knicks in another epic seven-game series that had been overshadowed by, of course, the white Bronco going down the freeway of California.
Yeah.
And then to top everything, you also had the World Cup in the, in the United States for the first time ever that summer.
Mhm.
And then to top it all off, you had the strike, the Major League Baseball strike that canceled the World Series for the first time in 1990, since 1904. So all of that happened within a space of within the summer of 1994. So that's why I consider it the summer that sports lost its innocence.
Mhm.
At least for me, because I idolized O.J. Simpson. I'm gonna be the first one to tell you. When I was a kid, I idolized O.J. Simpson and everything, and that's when it all changed for me. How I looked upon my sports idols and stuff like that. It all changed. I was 21 years old, and I was one of those people in the beginning was like, nah, that can't be right. That can't be right. No, there's no way. And then as more and more the story evolved, I was thinking, man, he's really a jerk. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it was one of those things that just woke me up to what, that athletes are regular people too. You know what I mean? So that's kind of like how for
Yeah.
me in 1994, like I said, I was 21 years old in college and, doing my thing. And that's how sports changed for me. Also, later on in the summer, I plan on doing a episode about the 1984 Summer Olympics that was in Los Angeles.
Mhm.
The first Summer Olympics I remember watching as a kid.
Same.
I didn't
Yeah.
know anything about the Olympics,
Yeah.
nothing. And then it was in the Coliseum in Los Angeles, which is on my bucket list to go visit before I die. That I have to see that because that stadium is the most beautiful stadium maybe next to the Rose Bowl, the most beautiful stadium in all of the United States, period. So
Yeah.
that's what I have kind of coming up, and then I may do another forgotten franchises. I might do one on the Montreal Expos, or you know, that's part that 'cause I've been doing basketball teams, so I want to do like a baseball team. So I'm thinking maybe the Seattle Pilots is one I've thought about, or the St. Louis Browns. The Seattle
Yeah. Yeah.
Pilots
Yeah.
might be a very short
I
episode.
was gonna
I
say, yeah.
might combine the Seattle Pilots and the Houston Colt 45s into one episode. So, I'll see how that goes. But that's pretty much what I have planned within the next couple of months on the podcast.
It's sort of funny though. Those things that you just mentioned, like they're right up there in my wheelhouse too. So like I'm a year older than you, so I remember the OJ thing at 22, thinking the same thing you did. Like, God, it's OJ. It's Nordberg. He didn't do anything. And
Right.
and more,
Exactly.
yeah, more info comes out. I still remember like so many people saying that he couldn't have. And we were just talking about that, my partner on the Hall of Fame show, because we look at all Hall of Famers who passed away and left us, and OJ being one of them. And like DNA, what's that? And like now,
You know, it, I
and
mean, the whole OJ thing and what's not. It kind of showed everybody, especially me, when all of the evidence and what's not that started coming out was like, like wow, he really did all of that, and it just it was. And then when he passed away, I was talking to a buddy of mine about that because he called me and told me, man, you heard OJ died? I was like, when you sit down there and write the obituary, everything that he had done in the NFL, if you wrote an obituary, like paragraph form or whatever, you don't get to what he did with the Buffalo Bills and what he did at USC until like maybe the fifth or sixth paragraph. If you
right,
really think about it, you don't get to all of the great stuff that he did at USC, and all of the 2,000 yards in 1973 and the 275 yards against the Lions on Thanksgiving Day in 1975. You don't think of that stuff. You don't even mention it until way down in the story. but what's at the top is what everybody remembers. And if you mention all of that stuff first, people looking at you side-eyed, like, what are you talking about? Which is basically going to be the crux of that episode. You had all of these great things that was going on in the summer of 1994, but you had two things that overshadowed it all, which was OJ and the player strike.
Yeah, it's also funny. One of the other ones you mentioned, the '94 baseball All-Star game. I do another thing it should be out shortly. So it's a classic sports show, and we look at old games, and we were looking at
Uh-huh.
the '94 All-Star game, knowing what was about to happen. And you talk about losing your innocence, right? So my partner on that one, we played a little bit of a game on that one, which was okay. How many people wound up taking PEDs, and how many people wound up beating up their wives? It was a tie.
Wow.
Yeah. So like it was, some people who you never would have thought that when Kirby Puckett playing in that game, like, oh, come on, Kirby didn't do anything bad, but then turned out he did.
Yeah. Yeah,
Chuck.
and it sounds like that was that time
Yeah.
when sports kind of like transcended into like TMZ, even though there was no TMZ back then. That's what it kind of morphed into, more of like tabloid-ish type of stuff. People weren't really, that was like the beginning of when people were not interested in, say, who won the game, who lost the game, what was the reasons why. They were like, yeah, they won, or so and so lost, or whatever. But what did they say after the game that caused beef with someone else?
Mhm.
That's where we are right now in sports. Unfortunately, I worked as a sports writer for a newspaper in Louisiana for 10 years, and it was at times I felt myself trying to go that route, and I just felt dirty doing it because I was like, I guess you consider myself the classic sports writer, whereas I just want to tell the people who won, who lost, how, what the coach said at the end of the game, what some of the players said about the game, that sort of thing, and just leave it alone. Everything else, outside, off the field or whatever, the beef and whatever else that may be going on, the controversial stuff that a lot of people were starting to thirst for, I just couldn't do it. I just
Yeah.
couldn't do it. That's just not how I roll, you know. And when I started doing this podcast, I tried to stay away from controversial stuff. I just want people to, it's going to be inevitable that you run into something controversial always. That's just the nature it is. That's just the way it is. But especially with the one I'm thinking about doing in 90 for the summer of '94. Um, that is one of the things that I try to stray away from, and you can't really do it most of the time. But sometimes, if you can, do it. Because I'm all about having fun, and this is the reason why I started this podcast, is an outlet of what I like to do, talk about sports and sports history, but at the same time, I want to have fun. This is not a job. This is something that's supposed to be fun.
Absolutely. Where can everyone find your show?
Well, I'm pretty much on all of the platforms, wherever you get your podcast from, iTunes, Spotify, different places like that, you could find us there. Once again, you could Google us, the world on the World Wide Web, historically speaking sports, and then you go directly to our page. I'm part of the Sports History Network. Bunch of really, really good guys that's part of that, and made a lot of friends through that, which was a lot of you know basically like birds of a feather flock together, but
Right,
that's
right.
us.
I totally understand that. Also, you're a great Twitter follow. So I still call it Twitter. I just can't get used to that.
I do too. I can't,
Yeah.
it is what it is. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I call it Twitter X, whatever.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
and I'm on Twitter also, historically SP2. So I try to do something every day on Twitter, as far as something historical that happened on that certain day, or something that I've noticed or whatever. I put something on Twitter. Sometimes I get to it and able to do it. Sometimes I'm not as successful busy with life and everything. So other than that, it's all good, man. And I'm
I hear
having
that.
fun doing it.
I hear that. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I encourage everyone to go give it a listen. And wherever you are, wherever you may be, make today count because it never comes again. Take care,
Right
everyone.
on. I like that.